what our
which we approve, and in the case of Watercare, you heard Watercare say, well, we've just got public meetings basically, and you can get access to everything, and so it would only be really contracts and certain things that they would be more, because of the competitive market, etc., that would be more hidden. But I think it just, David, do you want to?
Just in terms of clarifying what we're alluding to here, and I have had conversation with CCOs to clarify to them the expectation. So from my experience, you've got to find a sweet spot between very specific activities and distinguishing between them, but not going down right to the detail where you've got 1,000 lines and you've just got a whole lot of noise and can't make sense of it. So, but at the moment, if we recall the consultation last year, and I read the document, we just we basically set out 7 large buckets of money. The smallest was 182 million, and we had very little detail in it. So we shouldn't have been too surprised that the public really didn't get into it and actually say, well, I'd like you to do less of this and more of that. So it's really an invitation to the CCOs to revisit their activities and think about how they slice and dice it in a way which gives the public clarity about what they're doing, so they can actually make a judgment call on whether they value that activity or not. So that's really, it's a budgeting thing. It's what I would, if I was in central government, I'd call the output class, but in this context it's called the group activity or the activity line.
So it's not an invitation to the public if they have a concern or an interest or a desire for greater transparency to actually drill down a bit deeper with the CCO, and our expectation would be that there'll be some flow of information back to that person.
It is an invitation to drill down further, but not down to the contract level. I think the question around how CCOs disclose their major contracts and so forth is a separate matter from what's alluded to in this letter.
Rose.
That is correct. That's not what we were aiming for in this letter, but if you want to go onto the Auckland Transport website, you can actually see their contracts. I think it's over a certain amount. I have a feeling it's about $50,000, so you can actually, the public can already see that information.
But yeah, not the specifics of how subcontractors can operate within a contract or that sort of detail.
No, through the chair, but that would be going down to a level of detail that's starting to get quite something.
Yeah, maybe the detail of the last 8 weeks is going to show that.
Councillor Hulse.
Thank you. Just a quick question. Something I'm hugely supportive of in the 4th to last paragraph is the subsidiarity issue around local boards and the decision making to local boards, delegations to local boards. My question is, if we are going to go down that track, do we need to reference in the letter of engagement the fact that we will actually then amend the delegations?
We've asked through the chair, that is what we're going to be investigating as part of this accountability review. I'm not convinced myself that delegations is the only way that this can be done. I think that there are other ways that we can explore that might be more palatable to Auckland Transport. So, but the driver here is actually to get local boards with a degree of decision making that's appropriate for them, so they actually can make the different places of Auckland look different.
I guess the reality for me here is, and I very much agree with Councillor Darby, I think placemaking fairly and squarely at the centre of these letters is a very sensible way of doing things. But if we are going to, 6 years ago, miraculously, our community boards were able to make decisions about some very sensible placemaking. We seem to have become completely unable to do that. I'm just saying, why don't we go back to that? It would make peace with our local boards, it would give actual grunty work to do, and it would make a fundamental difference, and it would lift Auckland Transport out of the weeds, doing stuff that, to be absolutely blunt, is a complete and utter waste of time for a CCO like this. So I think we need to be as clear as we can in here. You tell us what you think could change. We will alter the delegations and the process to allow that to happen.
And fund it.
Good point, noted. So just people are getting a cheat. So it's Casey, Wayne Walker, Cooper, Collins, Fletcher, Sayers, Cashmore, Quacks.
Mr. Chairman.
Councillor Casey.
This is no reflection on whoever drafted the letter, but a few times we invite them to do things. And I don't like the invite to do things, but we're not telling them what we want. If that's the case, it's not an invitation, it's a telling. And so you can reword it to reflect that. Instead of, we invite you to consider expanding the bus lanes, we can say we seek expansion of the bus lanes, which is much more kind of, we're telling you what we'd like, than, could you have a wee look at this for us, please? So I think that's what we used to do in the past. So wherever you've got the we invite you, I'd like to change the English to make it a statement. The one thing that's missing, and it came up this morning and it's come up at every meeting of my Community Development and Safety Committee, is the responsibility Auckland Transport has for the safety of passengers. Now, it could be on buses, it could be on trains, it could be at stations, or it could be on level crossings, but there's no doubt that we've always been reactive. We always bring them in when something happens. And I think it's time we said, you actually have responsibility. The kind of bullet point I would like is just to ensure the safety of passengers on the network and at level crossings. Is that, it came up again today.
Or look at mitigating ways to assist the safety.
Everything's been noted down, folks. But we cannot just go and have then a discussion on everything. We'll be here forever. But the things have been noted, and we do go. So you do have to accept a little bit that the chair and the deputy share in consultation, or the mayor will consult us. Hopefully we get the balance, and we've got Rose and Eddie there, definitely listening to your views, as is David. Councillor Wayne Walker.
Sure. I'd like to seek a small change in wording on page 11, where it just states, provide technical advice on new technologies and demand management options and so on. I'd like that to read, aggressively pursue new technologies, along the lines of the other paragraph where it also says aggressively pursue. And that's further to the comment of Leicester Levy, where we know that the things that we can implement very, very quickly are demand management options, and it's critical that we do that. So I seek that wording, aggressively pursue. And the other matter that I'll raise, and I may have raised it before, and that is around aggressively pursue reduction in carbon emissions to mitigate climate change and prioritise the resilience of the transport network in adapting to climate change. And resilience could apply more widely. We've had the Kaikoura exercise recently. Climate change is precarious, and it is the major issue of our time. Auckland Transport is the main generator of, well, the transport network is the main generator of carbon emissions in Auckland. So it's not something, I think, just to have as part of council mandated strategies and policies. It's significant and it's immediate.
Councillor Cooper.
Thank you. Couple of things. One is around just some clarification. Page 19, expectations of Panuku. And it's 1, 2, 3.
We're still on
We're just sticking to transport at the moment.
Oh, are we? Sorry.
Yep, I'm sorry about that. Look, it'll get easier as we go through the others, I have no doubt.
Oh, okay.
Sorry about
So
that.
we're going to go through each one. So you're just going to tell us when we're on to the next thing?
Yep, we've got 4 more.
Then we go back to the end of the queue every time. Okay, that's fine. Wouldn't it be better if
I'm going to
everybody
put you
just...
first to the queue and Panuku. I'm making a note. Panuku.
But I've also got... Okay, well, can I talk about the transport stuff then?
Yep, okay.
Okay, so I do think that, you know, AT have got to work with the local boards on their placemaking. However, I'm a little concerned around if we start delegating stuff to them, how, if that competes with priorities, the wider priorities, how does that work? I think we've just got to be a little bit careful. We could be ending up at odds with similar budgets and et cetera, so that concerns me. And then if you've got 2 different parts of council directing AT, how does that work? So I just want, when you're looking at those delegations, is that cutting across? We want to make sure we don't do that while still allowing that flexibility. Yeah, that's all I want to talk about there. Thank you.
Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you, Mr Chairman, and thank you also for allowing the clarification as to whether this is a document from the Mayor or whether it's endorsed by the Council. What I'm hearing in all of this is a lot of wish listing, and I want to know what elasticity there will be within the budget to allow for all of these things, because there is nothing in here to allow for any major new initiative. Now, if I just talk about the fact that Auckland Transport, and I understand the Mayor is wanting to have greater accountability, I understand he's wanting to assert his authority. However, the project prioritisation tool that allowed for the transport alignment project was actually an initiative. It didn't enter a letter of expectation or anything else. That was an initiative because Auckland Transport found it impossible to respond to all of the many requests that were being put to them with a budget that didn't have that flexibility in it. So I really would like us to think about, one, what are we allowing them to do in terms of any new initiatives to actually deal with further project prioritisation? Where's the elasticity if we're going to just keep adding things? Otherwise, it just makes a farce of this whole process. If they are not going to be funded to do those things that we are asking of them, I'd like to know what is the role of the Appointments CCO and CEO committee in this. So it really comes back to prioritisation. We need to be very direct with Auckland Transport, but we have to be realistic as well. So maybe the Mayor could comment on that. There was also a quick point that I made the other day to Rose, and that is where we're wanting to be more aggressive about the introduction of bus lanes and so forth. We also want them to implement these things well, that we're not alienating communities where they're losing all the parking for their businesses and so forth. There's got to be careful management, strategic management of the implementation of these, and we're silent on that kind of political management in this document.
Yeah, just to answer that quickly, the budget doesn't expand according to the letter of expectation. The budget is what it is, and that's what we can get to invest in the projects we want. I think you're making a very fair point that the more requests you make of AT within a limited budget, the less clear the message as to what we want to prioritise. And I think that comes down to when I look at the final stage of the letters with the chair of the committee. If we've gone down too much into the detail and we've asked them to aggressively pursue everything, everything is devalued. So we've got to make clear in this letter where our priorities lie. But we can use the letter to state what, in principle, we are expecting them to do. But the more detailed and the more demands that we place in the letter, the less impact the letter has in terms of helping them decide what priority we expect of them.
And the role of the Appointments CCO and CEO committee? Where does that sit? Well,
that's a separate role in terms of obviously when we're appointing to the board of AT. We're taking into account the characteristics of the individuals who we think are best able to deliver what we want. When we're assessing their performance, we need to be able to assess that against what we've set out in the various documents that we're responsible for, including the statutory documents like the Auckland Plan.
And the third point that I was making, and I think it probably relates to the ability of Auckland Transport to be a better communicator, but the careful implementation of these policies in order that they are not later revisited, that they are undertaken comprehensively. Yeah,
I think, look, it's really important not to imagine that the letter of expectation, like any other single instrument, can do everything. And I think in terms of performance and in regard to communication, both of which are important points, a lot of that is going to come down to the discussions that I would have with the chair of the board or the CEO would have of the chief executive of the CCO. So let's not imagine that this one letter can do everything. This has a particular role to play in terms of what we expect from the board that we then want to see reflected in their statement of intentions. But we're going to have to use all of the instruments we've got in order to make sure that we achieve the overall objectives we're looking for from Auckland Transport, or for that matter, any of the other CCOs.
Thank you.
David.
Oh, look, I was just going to add in terms of Councillor Fletcher's last point. If you look at the letter on page 11, there is, and I think you had a discussion with Rose and Ed on this, there's a sentence saying a stronger focus on effective communication, consultation and problem solving is needed, and I think that's a direct response to your concerns to actually ensure that's highlighted.
I would hate to think that that is going to be watered down, though, by the inclusion of all these other things that have
Well,
been proposed.
I would share that concern.
But also, unless I was hearing you wrong with your initial introduction to Councillor Fletcher, as you were talking about basically new stuff that come up. So let's just take transport. I mean, light rail to the airport is way down the line on existing LTP. It's not even in the next 10 years. Yet it's getting a little bit more prominence and could become more of a priority